Welcome to our guest docket. Today we're going to interview attorney John Higgins with Frost Brown Todd. John, why don't you give us a little background with regard to where you went to school and kind of your hobbies and your interests?
Absolutely. I am a proud graduate of Norwood High School. I was born and raised in Norwood. Back in those days, I worked for a grocery store called Thriftway, and I started out at the old Kenwood store, which I think now is a Staples. Thriftway's out of business, of course. But I worked in the grocery stores for a couple of years and then worked out at the warehouse loading trucks. And for 11 years, I paid my way through college, and I graduated undergrad at the University of Cincinnati. I worked mostly second and third shifts at the warehouse for Thriftway. After I paid my way through the University of Cincinnati, I enrolled in law school up at Cleveland State University. I had previously been to Cleveland one time. It was to see a Pink Floyd concert. Decided it would be a fun place to move and go to law school. Likewise, paid my way through law school. I started practicing law initially in Cleveland, and importantly met my wife up in Cleveland, who's also a lawyer. I practiced at a law firm up there for about 2 or 3 years. My wife was appointed an assistant attorney general for the state of Ohio, so we had to move to Columbus. We lived in Columbus for a couple of years, and I practiced at a firm there. And then about 12 years ago, I got the opportunity to come back to Cincinnati, to my hometown, and work at Frost Brown Todd, where I'm now a partner at Frost Brown Todd. I'm in the unique position, having lived in the 3 major cities in Ohio, that my claim to fame is, at least no one's proven it wrong yet, is I think I've litigated more cases in more counties in Ohio than anyone, just by virtue of having lived in the 3 major cities. At Frost, and I've always done litigation, primarily complex business litigation and construction litigation. My focus has turned out to be what I call disaster construction projects, such as the Kenwood Town Place project.
How did you get into the construction litigation area?
You know, that's a very good question. I have a blue-collar background. Norwood was a blue-collar town, and like I said, for 11 years, I worked a blue-collar job. I'm very much drawn to that, and the good thing about working with construction clients is most of them are very blue-collar. One of my favorite things is you can deal with the CEO of a construction company who's likely to be wearing blue jeans and a shirt rather than a suit and tie.
You know, we're here to discuss the Kenwood Town Center project, and you know, you were there from the very, very beginning, and I think it's just an absolutely fascinating story, and I'm sure our viewers will find that to be the case. So if you could, why don't you just start from the beginning and tell us a story about Kenwood Town Center?
Sure. You know, a lot of people don't realize that when you represent a client, you know, you're very much a trusted advisor to that client. And I make it a point to understand and know the business of my clients, and such was the case with the Kenwood project. I initially represented George Steel, who fabricated the steel for the Kenwood project, and Sofco Erectors erected the steel. So I kept in regular contact with my client, George Steel, to understand how the project was going. Now keep in mind, the origin of the Kenwood project was the I don't want to say failed, but stalled project down at Rookwood and Norwood. That case was pending in litigation in the Ohio Supreme Court, which really gave rise for the opportunity to move that project up the road to Kenwood, to the heart of the retail district. So throughout the project, I knew when my client started working on the project. I knew when they were not getting paid. You know, hey, a month went by and we're owed $1 million. 5 months went by, we're at $5 million.
Let me ask you to step back a little bit from that. You know, the Rookwood project is stalled, nothing's really happening there. Who were the players that put together the project to go from there, to take those stores and other tenants and put together the whole project up in Kenwood?
You know, really the main developer of Kenwood, if you will, was a guy named Matt Daniels, who probably most of the viewers are familiar with the name. Matt had a development company called Bear Creek Development, or various variations of Bear Creek. Bear Creek Capital. Their office was in downtown Montgomery. So Matt was sort of the developer. He had other investors with him as well, and other partners. But Matt was the driving force. He formed a with his investors, formed a single-purpose LLC called Kenwood Town Center LLC, or Kenwood Town Place, excuse me,
right.
Kenwood Town Place LLC. He also formed a single-purpose construction company called Bear Creek Construction LLC, which interestingly enough had never ever constructed anything because it was a brand new company. Mm-hmm. And there was a guy named Aubrey Tarpley, I didn't say that very clearly, who was hired to run Bear Creek Construction. So the way the delivery method, if you will, on Kenwood was you had this single-purpose limited liability company with Matt Daniels and his investors, and then you had Bear Creek Construction, which was owned by primarily Matt Daniels and Bear Creek, and then a guy named Aubrey Tarpley to run that company. And then you had several subcontractors underneath. I represented several of the subcontractors underneath.
And when did you figure out, or what happened, or what led to you getting involved in the project? How did that come about?
Sure. Back to the timeline, if you will. So I was aware that George Steele wasn't getting paid timely. And there were a lot of promises of payment, flat out lies of payment from Bear Creek and others. They would promise payment on a certain date, and it just wouldn't show up. This was in the fall of 2008. And George Steele made the decision right around Thanksgiving 2008 to pull off the project. So if you recall what that project looked like, the steel was being fabricated and erected. The steel got all the way to the roof. They call that the deck. We got to the point, if we put the deck on, we didn't think we'd have any leverage to ever get paid. So we thought it would be a great time to pull off the project, which is what we did. We pulled off the project, hoping for a quick resolution that we'd see some money. Unfortunately, as everyone knows, that project sat there for several years looking like a steel skeleton sticking up in the air. But at that time, we made the point to pull off. And I think it was about a week later, Matt Daniels came out and asked us to go back to work, but couldn't promise to pay us any money. So obviously, we didn't go to back to work. It was shortly after that you started seeing a lot of the other contractors pull off. I also represented the glass, architectural glass and metal on that project, and Baker Concrete, who did all the concrete for that project. So flash forward a little bit to the spring of 2009, and AGM, Architectural Glass and Metal, had delivered $3 million in value of glass. And the glass is essentially the outside of the building, the windows. When you drive past it, that's what you see. So about $3 million in inventory sitting around that building that they hadn't been paid for. And you think they would either pay you for it or give it back, and we would do neither. So we had to go to court and get a court order that we could take that glass back, which we did. So we had a little bit of leverage, or at least we thought. We had the glass to finish it, we had the steel to finish it. I also represented the concrete. Shortly after that, and so what you do at that point too, in general, is if you're in construction, you can file a mechanics lien that will give you a secured interest. If you provide labor or materials to a project, you file a mechanics lien and you go record it, much like you would record your bank probably records a mortgage on your house. At least I have a mortgage on my house.
At the recorder's office and the county recorder's office?
Right.
And when you file the lien, is that actually against the Bear Construction, or does it go against the bank, or does it go against both?
When you file mechanics lien, it goes against the property. So whoever is the owner of the property, it's an encumbrance on the title to that property. So in this case, the Kenwood project was owned by Kenwood Town Place LLC, and they had several encumbrances. First, they had a mortgage levied against it, so that goes against the title, against the owner, and then the mechanics lien, the same thing. And what got to be the complex issue in the case was the dispute amongst the secured interest between the mechanics lien holders and the mortgage, which is not a very interesting issue, but it was a very complex legal issue. And when the bank filed a foreclosure action You can do the same thing too with your mechanics liens. So right around May or June of 2009, Bank of America, who at that point held the mortgage, if you will, on the property, filed a foreclosure action. And the way that works is anyone who has a secured interest is a party to the litigation. So all of the mechanics lien holders, the county, if you owe taxes, those are all parties to the litigation. And you sort out who has the first and best priority, and then you figure out who's going to get paid if there's any money to pay anyone.
How was the issue resolved?
Well,
or has it been resolved?
That issue has been resolved. It took several years of litigation. Normally, when that happens, it's clear legally that the mortgage has the first and best priority. We felt that there was a very good argument that the legal document, which is called a notice of commencement, that would give the bank the first and best priority. We thought the notice of commencement was defective. It's essentially a 1 or 2 page document, and by law in Ohio it has to contain, I think it's 13 or 15 pieces of information, and we thought at least 5 pieces of those information were not accurate. So we went and litigated that issue. We said, look, we don't think the notice of commencement is valid because we think it has inaccurate information. If you throw out that document, the mechanics liens have the first and best priority. The trial court ruled against us on that issue. We appealed that issue up to the Court of Appeals. Unfortunately, we never got there because the bank who held the mortgage made a point to make the appeal moot. So we never got to resolve that. What happened is once the appeal became moot, as you know, as lawyers, the issue's dead. You don't even talk about it. Now, the way it became a moot point is the project was forced through the sheriff's sale. And the way that works is if you get a judgment and you're a secured creditor, the sheriff comes and auctions off the property and distributes the proceeds.
So what happened with the sheriff's sale? Did it go forward?
The sheriff's sale went forward. I'm trying to think of the timing on that. I'm going to say it was about 2, maybe 3 years ago. And it's interesting. If you're a creditor, you can bid on the property at the sheriff's sale. Let me back up about the value of the property. The sheriff goes out and has the duty to appraise the property. And then there's a minimum bid that has to come in if anyone wants to buy the property. But if you're a secured creditor, you can bid about, I believe the rule is 2/3 of your debt towards the purchase price, which is sort of tricky because you're not really spending real money. You know, you have a piece of paper that says I'm owed $96 million or whatever the bank had in this case. Mm-hmm. So they pledged, and I think the sheriff's sale was $27 million. So the bank, and the way that works is you don't pay $27 million out of pocket, you just reduce your debt. So if your debt was 96 and you just pledged 27 to obtain the property, now you're only owed 96 minus 27. That's what happened here. It's hard to outbid somebody when you have $96 million of not real money to bid, and I'm sure if someone had real money that could outbid that, the bank would have gladly taken it. So the bank had the first and best priority. The project went through the sheriff's sale, which made the appeal moot, and that issue was resolved. Of course, there's new ownership now, and the project's going forward under new ownership.
John, we appreciate your time today. Thank you for sharing this information. I know I've learned a lot today based on this issue, and I appreciate you coming down today.
Absolutely. It was great to have you.